All right, so welcome. Again, today we are covering applications and spray sheets. So we'll just kind of talk about how to set up applications real briefly, and then show the spray sheet report, and talk through some of the options, some common questions that we get, troubleshooting steps that we see most often in trying to get that report the way you want it. So I just have a tutorial trial here to kind of talk through. And I guess we'll start here just with looking at the treatments editor and talking through this example. So we kind of have some baseline here, just a general made up herbicide trial where we've got a couple different products that we're wanting to apply, and they'll be applied twice through the season. And we have two different types of applications. And so the first one is just a simple foliar. The fourth treatment here actually is a tank mix. So we have two different treatment components that will be, in this case, applied together as a tank mix. And so once you have that list of treatments, the products that you're working with, really the key to setting up the application is to utilize the application code section. And that will link up from these specific products to the other section of our trial where we can define the applications, which would be, the events going out to the field or to your trial and applying one or more of those treatments to your plots. So going over to the application section, this is where we can define those events. And so in ARM, we denote each application by a different letter. So that way we don't confuse treatment one. So the treatments have the numeric values. So we wanted to use applications, use letters. So there's very clear difference as to what we're referring to. So application A would be the first event, first application event that occurs. The next one would be B, C, and so on. And so you can define the main definition, if you will, of what is going to occur in an application really comes down to these three fields: the method, the timing, and the placement would be the biggest ones to really hone in and say specifically what is occurring, when is it going to occur at, and where, how is it being applied. And then within this trial, there is a variety of weather-related information that you can document next. Those are less important for this initial talking about setting up the applications. And actually, you won't even see most of those fields in a protocol, since you're really just talking about setting up the plan for the applications. The other part here, if we switch over to the application equipment section, is going to define the any equipment related information about how the application was made, nozzles, booms, whatever you may use. And then at the bottom here, we have the application amount and mix size information. So this would be another component that, again, if you're in a protocol, you'll see this information. And that's really kind of the other big component that we'll talk about today, as it really does impact our spray seeding plan and how much product that we're going to calculate. So going back to our treatment list, just to kind of talk through our example again, set the stage. We have that herbicide being applied at two different times. And you'll notice that I gave the application code A and C. So there's two different events that this product will be applied to. So I put the two different codes just combined together as letters. You can do a space if you want, however you'd like, but just combining the two of those into the same row is a nice compressed way to do that and still link this product to both of those events, both of those times they will be applied. Same exact thing for this second product, whose really the only difference is that it's being applied at a larger rate. And then this third one, treatment number 4, has different codes. So B and D, because of the tank mix. So I want to go back then to the application equipment tab here to explain one kind of common trick to these application codes. A lot of times on the surface, it would seem like each day that you may go out to make an application should be its own code. And in a lot of cases, it is. That would be in our case, two times we'll go out through the season, so we should only need 2 application codes. On the surface, a lot of times that's kind of the assumption, but that's not necessarily the case. And that's why I set up this example to show that, in fact, I go to my application, you can see that both A and B were applied at the same date. And the reason we used 2 different codes is because there was some significant difference in how one or more of the treatments are applied in that one, we'll call it event, of going out to our trial and making the application. So going back to my application equipment, I'll show the reason. Our treatment number 4 is a tank mix. For example's sake, I'm saying that requires a larger application amount and therefore a larger mix size. So as a result, even though we're going to make both of these, A and B, we're going to make those applications at the same time, the same day out in the field, because there is a significant difference in the description of those applications, we needed to give ourselves a second code. So something significant like our application amount, I used that one because it'll have obvious implications when we go to try to calculate how much product we need to measure. Of course, that's going to now differ if we have a larger mix size. Definitely, we're going to need more product relative to this smaller mix size. So we need to have those separate codes, and that's why back on the treatment section, we had a different A and C versus B and D. And so then we replicated that second time through. We did the same thing. So C and D are also happening on the same day, but because there's a major difference in the way it's being applied, we split that out. So the long story short, on that application codes, you may have more than one code for a specific, what some people would just call an application of going out to make an application. You might have more than one code, just depending on what's actually occurring during that event. All right. Real quick before we move on to the report, I do just want to point out one somewhat newer feature added this past year in ARM related to applications. You'll find this NA button above some of these applications. So if you have a scenario where something happened and the application that was planned isn't actually performed, whether there was some weather event or the trial had to be halted early or whatever it might be. Oops, clicked a little early there. You can turn on this NA. And you can see when I turn that on, it's marking this application as not applied. So it's grayed out this whole column. which of course doesn't make sense that I have an application date. In theory, you would not have the application date there yet because nothing actually occurred. But that's a way to mark that application as not applied. And if I do that again with application D here, you'll see what happens. ARM brings us to the deviations section. So of course, if there's something major like an application not occurring, we want to have some documentation as to why. So here we are on the deviations section of the site description. ARM filled in today's date and the deviation title, that application D was not applied. And now we have an opportunity to explain and document why. Why was it not applied, whatever purpose and reason for that to occur or not occur in this case. So that's just a newer functionality, which of course I'm going to turn these back on. And it's just letting me know if you're actually now going to apply D, you should probably remove those deviations. This is just a tutorial, so I'm not too worried about how messy this might make it. I'll just put today's date in here just to have something again. All right, so that's the applications and kind of how they link together with the treatments. Really then the next phase is to calculate how much product we will need to apply when we go to make these applications. And we have our rates that we've defined for our treatments, but ARM can actually give us the actual amount to measure out when we're there ready to make the application. Based on the plot size, in this case, it's a per area rate. It can calculate for us what we need. So I'm going to go to print reports, either on the toolbar under file and print reports. And we have a spray seeding plan over here on the list of available reports. And I'm using the standard one that includes all treatments by default. There are sub options for spray and seeding that just tries to sort out your treatments based on their formulation type. So a spray, I think the seeding would drop out and only include like variety treatments. The components in your treatment list that are variety, seeding type of treatments, and then the spray would be kind of the opposite of it. So those would just filter out and just automatically not include certain treatment lines from the report based on that goal. Before we move on, I noticed I had a question about the not applied. So let me just go back real quick to look at that application. And when we turned on the not applied, then we emptied out our application date. And typically, if you mark a trial as final and you don't have an application date defined, there'll be validation warnings to say, hey, if you think this trial is done, you didn't record a date for your application. But if you do turn on the not applied, then that rule drops out. So ARM will say, well, there's no date in this one application that you didn't have. So there, if I turn off D, there's no date here. But because it's marked as not applied, it will not fail that validation. Since we've noted that this wasn't applied, then there is no validation error. There's no problem because we now know for sure you did not apply that. So the validation where it's looking at the different rules, whether it's the built-in one about application date, if I had some rule to require the temperature or something, that also only applies to your applications that have an application date. And so therefore this one here that was not applied isn't going to trip the validation. So a good question of just how that will end up looking at the end of the season when you're going through that validation to make sure everything is filled in and correct. That not applied then ARM knows to ignore most of the typical rules since it wasn't a full application that made it to the end. Great question. All right, so jumping back ahead to our spray seeding plan. We chose standard here. That's typically what makes the most sense. It'll include all of your studies there. And I guess before we talk about specific options, I'm just going to move ahead and preview the report. And before we get to generate the report, one thing that we can see is the application plan. So this dialog will come up as a nice overview for us. So on the top half, we have application information, and it's got different components from settings, crop details, and some of the application information. This is kind of especially helpful if you're doing like leaf wall area calculations and things like that, where there's a lot of different components, different information throughout the crop and settings that factor into calculating how much leaf wall area you would have. So that was the kind of the original purpose of this dialog, was to make that clear, and you could see everything that goes into that calculation. So it makes sense as we begin to calculate the treatments and the rates. But I think it's very helpful even without that type of application, just to see a nice overview of what's filled in and what we are getting ourselves into, if you will. So down here we have the list of treatments as well. And we can, if we want to, only generate a report for one or more applications, you can do the selection here at the top. Or if you leave them all blank, it'll automatically include all of them. And you can see when I change that down below, it sorts the treatment list. So ones that aren't going to be included drop down to the bottom, and only treatments involved in what has been selected will be included and kind of colored in this green color. So if I drop out even B, you can see the only ones that are linked to A will be included on the report. I'll clear that out so we can bring in everything. All right, so now let's preview this report. I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, so this is our spray seeding plan report. Primarily, we have the list of treatments and whatever details you can kind of customize how much of this information comes through. As far as the treatment details from the treatment editor, but of course, definitely the most important ones would be the name and our rate and the applications that they're linked to. You can see here, because I have that application D marked as not applied, it's crossed off on the report, and it won't be included in any of our calculations here in this report. Then we also have the application amount and our mix size, which will always print out if you're in a situation like mine where we had a difference between the two. Otherwise, if they were all 200 liters per hectare, you'd see them up top here as another part of the header. But since there's a difference depending on which treatment line you're looking at, ARM will make sure things are very clear and drawn out for that. Then moving to the right, we have kind of the main reason we're here, which is the amount of product to measure. So ARM now has calculated, based on the product rate, our mix size, and the application amount, how much we need to measure out. So in this case, we'll need just over 96 mils of that Stomper Plus in order to make that application. And then it'll show each the plot number where we will go to make and apply that product to. And so then that repeats, of course, for each product. The check has nothing to apply, of course, but then for each product, we have the appropriate calculation This one here, treatment 4, is a dry, so it's calculated in grams, whereas the rest of these liquids are in milliliters. So ARM handles all of that kind of internally there to give you the appropriate amount. Now I have a question that we'll actually get to later. They notice that the treatments are sorted differently. And in fact, they're really being sorted by the first replicate. So we'll see that a little later as we dive into the options of where we can change that. The second portion of the report is the product totals. So this, of course, the top portion was specific to the applications that we're making. Then ARM totals up across all the different applications and treatments involved in the study, gives us a grand total of how much product we would need. So for example, my Stomper Plus, is in 2 different treatments. And of course, they're applied 2 different times. So we really have 4 times the amount that you might see here as the grand total amount of product we would need across all the different applications for this trial. If you're doing some quick math, it doesn't quite add up to exactly 4 times that number, because there's also an overage here. So there's a 25% overage, which we can adjust in our settings if you want to change that. But of course, you want to make sure you have enough product if you are ordering. So that's why it's a little larger to say, hey, I need to make sure we have at least that much. So there's an overage added onto that total. And again, we are using multiple applications as well, so it knows how many are planned out, which in this case, there's a little less of that super stomp and NIS because we cleaned out that D. So because that's not applied, it's not included in these calculations. All right, I'm going to go backwards here, back to our report options, and there's a variety of them. I'm going to hit the real big ones first. And one of the more common ones that are asked under this application code, there's an option to sort by. And what that will do, instead of giving us one table that kind of showed us all of the products, it'll repeat that table and only show the ones for each application code instead. I'm just going to preview it on this report to kind of show that difference. I'll zoom in a little more since we don't need to see all of the numbers. So here you'll see I have a bunch of tables. They're all kind of squished together because I've got that option on to compress my report. But now here we have one for just application code A. And so we only have the treatments involved with application code A. We still have the product amount to measure, but that list is limited. And then it moves on to application code B with just the products linked to B, and so on and so forth. So that one can be nice. And if we went to the next page, I have the option on to compress the report. So if I turn that off and then I preview, I'll just show that you can have it actually be a separate page for each one of those tables. And that might be a little nicer, of course, especially if they're being applied on different days, to have them all on a different page. So this is just for application A, and then a separate page, application B, and so on. So again, that was splitting it out by application code, just the sort by option underneath the application code heading in the report options. Another big option for the actual product amount to measure, you can change the basis for which ARM is calculating those product amounts. So last time we had it based on our mix size, but you could calculate based on the area of one plot or the area of one treatment, which would be, the area of one plot times your reps or however many reps you have in your study. And so if I preview that, anytime you change that option, ARM will probably ask you, you changed that option to be area of one treatment, but the product amount totals, that second table, kind of has its own set of options. And so ARM is just trying to make sure that we maybe keep both of those together, and both of them should be maybe using that same basis. So it's asking if I should also have that product amount totals table change to also be area of one treatment. So I usually say yes to keep those two kind of in sync. So now our product amounts, we have 87.5 mils for 5 plots. So instead of using that mix size that we were using, instead we are kind of calculating the total amount for all 5 of those plots, just based on our rate instead of utilizing that mix size. So that's the amount of product amounts based on option to control what exactly what the target, if you will, for those product amounts. So looking back at that mix size, that's kind of the other common confusion sometimes that we get. Let me say yes, so it goes back to that. So this mix size value, unfortunately, there's a few different spots in ARM where that can be filled in, both the mix size and the application amount. They're kind of linked together. There's a couple different spots, and I think sometimes it can be a little confusing where exactly ARM is pulling that information from. And so that's kind of the most common question probably this time of year when people are working on their reports is, hey, I noticed my mix size wasn't the number I wanted, so I went in and changed it in the trial, and then I come back here and it didn't change at all. So it's really a matter of where am I supposed to be changing it? And so there's a certain kind of order of operations, if you will, as to where ARM is looking for that value and how it knows which one to use in order to create and use that product to measure. So the number one spot that ARM looks is in the site description, specifically here in that application equipment. So this is really the most direct way, since we have a spot for each application code to be very explicit as to what was used. So this is really the first place ARM will look. So if you have information entered here, this is where ARM will look and use these values in order to calculate the amounts on the report. That way it's very cut and dried. Any product that's linked to application code A will use a mix size of 2.64 liters. And then any product with B will use 3.4, etc. So it's very, very clear and clean, I think. However, on the treatments editor, we do also have, right now it's hidden, I've got the application amount visible, but there's also, in my list of hidden fields, there's also a mix size here. There we go, oops. So over here to the right, kind of after that application code designation, we have some information, and there is the chance to put in a mix size here as well. We can talk about this mix size calculator before we get too far, but just to fill something in there, it is possible to put information here. However, like we said, this is kind of the second place ARM will look for it. So in my case, since I had everything filled in my application section, ARM will never use these values. It would only be if the application equipment was blank. So let's imagine that for application A, these needed to be different. And that's really the only use case for these fields is if part of the treatment, like really what you're testing is a different water amount or a different mix size. That would really be the only time that I think it would be valid to do this. And so you're based on per treatment, you would have a different application amount or mix size. So again, really, for a little bit there, a couple of years ago, we tried taking these away or making them read only, and we almost got away with it because there's a lot of times it's not necessary to use these. But there is some research being done where that is part of the treatment. Part of what we're testing is the water volume. Part of the testing is what our mix size amount is. And so in that situation, it really should be here in the treatment because that is what's under test. That's what we're testing. And so we had to leave these available, but in general, in most cases, this is not where you'd want to put it. Like we said, our original situation where this product was the different one. So this was the 250 and this was 200. It sure seems like it makes sense to put it here. It's nice that it's here. This is the way it is, but really it's more clear and straightforward to have that in the application equipment section. And we just use the different application codes like we talked about earlier. So that would be the second place ARM looks for it if we don't have the information here filled in for the application. And you'll see I have some defaults here as I click into each of these fields. Those are coming from the third location where we have the opportunity to fill this in. And that would be your trial settings. So thus we've got a lot of confusion because now we have a third spot where this information can be filled in, and that's in the settings. So really this is the last place ARM will look. If there's absolutely nothing in the application equipment, there's nothing in the treatment list, then ARM will come here. So we have at least some value to use in the product calculations. Again, not really the recommended approach, but this is the last place it would look. But it also serves as the default. So you saw how easy it was to quickly fill in all of those values because they were just auto-filled based on what I had in my settings. I guess while we're here, I've kind of danced around this tool that we have, and it's both here in the application, but also when you're in the mix size, there's this little tool icon and it'll pop up this same little dialog. We call it the mix size calculator. And really what this is doing, ARM is taking the size of your trial, so the number of replicates and your plot size, and then the application amount you've defined here, the 200 liters per hectare, and calculating the minimum amount of mix you would need to cover that area. So if we have 200 liters per hectare, but we're only needing to cover 24 square meters times 5, because we've got the 5 different replicates for a particular treatment, that means we would need 2.4 liters of mix to just cover that area. Then, of course, you maybe not want to cut it quite that close to be exactly right. So there is an overage here. So this overage we're defining for the mix size specifically. So we've got the 2.4 liters. If I want to have a 10% overage, that'll give me a grand total of 2.64 liters then is how much mix size we'll use. So that way we mix up that amount to make our applications. We'll have just enough and a 10% more just in case for making the application. You can also do the overage in mils or liters. So if you know, really I typically run with 250 mils just to fill the lines. When I'm making that application, you can be very specific to mils as well. But either way, that's going to add on from that minimum, add on your overage to give you a mix size there. And so this overage is a little different than the one we talked about a little while ago when we were looking at the product totals. So the product totals was kind of after the application's done, just getting a whole grand total of all of the product that we would need. And we had a 25% overage on that. So that's just to the level of, I need to make sure I've got enough product here at our facility in order to make this work and to go make those applications. So that 25% overage was in the report options to determine that kind of grand total. This overage is very specific to the time of making that application and how much overage you would want based on that bare minimum area you need to cover with your mix size. So this is an overage for making that application. Our 25% earlier is the overall how much product do I have on the shelf here to get this trial done. All right. So real quick, just to recap those three different areas. The first place ARM will look, the absolute best spot to document specifically what's the amount, what's our mix size for each application is to do it in the site description. If your treatment, if your study specifically is looking at a difference in the application amount or a difference in mix size, then you would go and utilize the treatments instead. If all else fails, really more for setting a default would be the settings and filling it in there. So those are the three spots ARM uses in that order, just depending on your situation. A question here about calculating a mix size if you're spraying trees. I guess it would maybe come down to your product rate. So there's a chance you don't need a mix size there. If I don't know if you'd be doing a canopy or I guess the leaf wall area probably wouldn't be what you would want because that's 3-dimensional, not just a wall. Trying to think of what the other one is. Let me bring up that application plan. Tree row volume. That might be the calculation you'd be looking for there. So that you can utilize some of your row spacing and size of your plots, which you would have a slightly different because you're looking at the trees. ARM can calculate a treated row volume, tree row volume. And if your product rate is based on a certain amount of tree row volume, then ARM can use that to give you a calculation. I don't really have that mocked up here to kind of show that. But if you want any help kind of diving into some specifics, send us an email. We can kind of try to help you through that particular scenario. But I'm guessing that might be the route to go is the tree row volume. All right, so I'm going to move on to a another study. It's very similar to the last one. I've got just a couple of extra treatments, and this is just kind of rigged up to highlight some of those common questions and issues that come up. So we'll try to go through them fairly quickly. And let me load, I want to load my options again, back to the way they were to start with. All right, so I'm just going to kind of go back and forth here with this report and talk through some of the common questions that we get. Maybe I'll zoom out here to start with. So looking at this report, I can see it is split out by application code. So application code A is here. And so then if I go down to my second page, application B, and the question is, why? Why is it split out by application code? I actually want it all combined into just one table. And we look at our option, we don't have that option on to sort by application code. So why is it split out into different tables instead of one nice table like we saw the very first time we printed a report? And the reason is actually based on how I have defined my treatments. So you'll see here, products 2 and 3 are linked to applications A, B, and C. Well, A has a mix size, has our 200 and our 2.64 for our application amount and our mix size. And so we can get an amount of product to measure. We go down to application B, the application amount is 250. And thus our mix size is different. And so our product amount is different. So for example, treatment number 2, we would calculate 85 milliliters for application B, whereas we were at 82.5 for application A. So ARM sees that there's a difference. It can't combine and put just one table for us because treatment number 2 has a different amount to measure depending on which application that you're making. So if you're kind of stuck in this way of how come it won't just combine them all into one list, it's because at least one of the products has a different amount depending on the application. So in my case, we'll call it the fix, is the fact that, well, really they don't belong with B. Kind of like we had in our last example, it actually should be applied only at A and C. And now if we go back, we have everything back in one table, because now it's true, these amount that we see and are calculated are the same across all of their own applications. All right, the next question we actually had somebody notice earlier was this treatment order. So why is this out of order? It'd be kind of nice to have it in my same order as my list of treatments. So that we will find back in the report options. I'm going to click on more options so we get all of the different sections. And there is a tab at the top called Sort. So we can choose how to sort the table. And right now it's set to be sorted by replicate 1. But if I change it to sort by treatment, now when we preview the report, we'll see treatment 1, then treatment 2, treatment 3, 4, 5. So that was in the report settings, the sort section, to choose how that list should be sorted. All right, the next one here, treatment number 3. Notice that there is no product amount to measure for treatment number 3. How come it's not calculating that? A lot of times it might be everything. Everything in this table is empty. It's not giving me an amount of product to measure. There might be a few different reasons for it, but the number one reason most typically is that we didn't fill in the formulation type. So if I go back to my treatment list, we have our product rate that we've defined. We even have a concentration for our formulation. But what we really need is the formulation type. So ARM knows, is this a dry or a liquid formulation? And whether it is diluted or undiluted when we're making that application. So looking at the formulation type list, that's really just from the how do I, what am I calculating? That's why the formulation type is so important. Is both of those information of, are we dealing with grams of product because it's a dry formulation, or are we working with milliliters because it's a liquid? And then, of course, if it's something that's going on undiluted, then we're not even going to use the mix size in our calculation versus one that does first get mixed with our application amount. So it's important to, and I think EC would be the one in this case that we need, as it's a liquid that will be applied, will be diluted in our water carrier first. So by putting in a formulation type, that now gives us that calculation there. Finally, the last one here, treatment number 4, you'll notice we do have a product amount, but it's bold. So ARM will put a product amount in bold to point out if the basis for the product amount is different than the rest. So here we're calculating per mix size according to our report option here. Our product amount is based on mix size. So most of these are all based on our mix size of 2.64 liters in this case. But for this super stomp product, you can see the mix size is actually blanked out. And instead we've calculated grams per 1 plot. So of course we want to bold that so that way it's obvious that it's a little different compared to the rest of them in the table. And the reason in this case that it's calculating per 1 plot is based on that formulation type. And this DL is a undiluted formulation type. So this super stomp is not actually being first put through and mixed with our spray volume, but instead would go directly onto the plot. Or perhaps in my case, since we've been working with this product this whole session, we know that that's actually not the case. I must have picked the wrong formulation type. But that's the key there. And so we're not using the mix size in any calculation if it's undiluted. And so ARM wants to bold that on the report to make that obvious. This is a little different than the rest of the products on that report. So in theory, really more realistically, I should probably have this as an EC again, like we did before. And there, now it's not bold. Now they're all using the mix size. All right, well, that was my kind of fast and furious list of problems mocked up. I do have one example in my back pocket for if time allows us to talk through a granule situation that sometimes can be a little tricky, but want to make sure if there are questions, which we had some good number of questions throughout the session, but just want to make sure that we have time for those before diving in if we did have a minute to talk through that last example. But I think we've covered all the questions I received so far. I guess if there aren't any others, I can talk through this last example. All right. So this last example is kind of totally different from the scenarios we've been talking through so far. But it is one that we have come up once or twice a year, it seems, in our support box. So I thought might be interesting to talk through. And so this is often a granule application. So we have some dry fertilizer that is a granule that's going to be applied to the plot. In this case, 50 kilograms per hectare. But before that application occurs, we're actually going to have some liquid fertilizer that we want to apply to the dry fertilizer granule first. So we're going to soak this dry granule in some other liquid product, and before we actually go out and make the application to the field with that granule. So kind of tricky, a little bit different scenario than a lot of the products that we looked at previously. And so this liquid fertilizer, maybe in my case, I got 2 liters per ton of that dry fertilizer that we're going to need. And we're applying that to the dry fertilizer, not to the plot. So, we don't have an obvious, well, what's my mix size, or what do we use for the liquid, because we're not basing it on the area of the plot, but by the amount of dry fertilizer. So the process to make this to work, first step would be to bring up the spray seeding plan, and we're going to do area of 1 treatment. And sure, we'll keep that product amount, that's fine. And so we're going to look at the dry fertilizer and write down the amount of product, how many granules, or the weight, I guess in this case, of granules we need across those 5 plots. So I've got 600 grams of the dry fertilizer I'm going to need to make it across those 5 plots. So the trick then is to make that the mix size for our liquid fertilizer. So 600 grams is our number here. So my liquid fertilizer I have linked to application F. So let's go into our application here. And bring up our mix size tool. So our mix size, the application amount's really irrelevant. So what we want to have is our 600 grams. And in my case, we want grams of seed. The word seed here obviously isn't quite perfect, but if you can imagine, instead of seeds, we're really talking granules. So not a 1-to-1 match, of course, but using that mix size of grams of seed for the 600 grams, that will give us the right amount of granules that we'll then be applying that liquid to. And that's really the goal, to set that mix size there. And just a word of warning, like we said, this application amount, which has now been renamed slurry rate since we've got a grams of seed selection here, it doesn't really matter what this number is. I usually tell people that if you put in a 0, it'll be clear that number never is used in any of the calculations. The only trick, the word of warning, is do not choose kilograms per hectare as the slurry rate. It sounds really good. It seems very close to what we're actually trying to do, but actually this kilograms per hectare rate, it's not the rate unit, it's the application amount unit, it actually is for a totally different scenario. It's like Asian rice trials is where the calculations come from. So it does something totally different and usually doesn't give us the right amount in the end. So for whatever reason, it kind of breaks the calculations if you use this. So it's kind of funny because we're not actually using this number anyway, but if you have kilograms per hectare as that unit, the whole thing breaks, which is kind of wild and crazy, but it just is the way the numbers work behind the scenes. So put in a 0 and just take the default or whatever it gives you there. So now we have kind of the appropriate amount of that dry fertilizer for this liquid application that we're going to do first. So then if we look at our spray seeding plan, there we get a calculation now. So at a rate of 200 liters per ton, we find out that we'll need 1.2 milliliters to apply to that 600 grams of our dry fertilizer. And you make that application first. Then when you get to the point of putting that dry fertilizer on the plots, then you'll have that 600 grams and off you go. But that's really the trick there to convince ARM how to make it work, is getting in that mix size to be the amount of the dry fertilizer. Question here, if you have low product requirements for a treatment, you really can't accurately measure the correct volume or weight, then they make a stock solution of the product. I'll admit I'm not an expert on the stock solution, but I do believe we have a place in ARM to do that. Can't remember if it's a hidden field here. Yes, dilution factor. So that is over here, probably hidden by default for you as well. I'm trying to show my help on the screen. So the dilution factor you would use when you're preparing your stock solution. So then if you put in an amount there, this example gives us a 100 for the dilution. That would be 100 times the dilution. So when ARM is calculating that spray seeding plan, you'll get that amount with the 100 times the stock. And I'll admit I've never done that, so I don't have a great visualization of how that makes sense in my brain of how you're actually doing that. But hopefully that gives you an idea, at least of where to go with that. Again, that was the dilution factor. That was a field in the treatment editor. You might just have to, might have to turn that on through the hidden fields. But that would be the way to get that stock solution. And if we use that example here, put a 50 into treatment 2, then our spray seeding plan, if I zoom in a little to show that now is different. It's got the 50x stock there for you. And there's an asterisk. It's not happy because probably the rest of my calculations in there doesn't make a lot of sense. It's warning me the amount of product exceeds the mix size and yada yada, but that's the way to initiate that stock solution. All right, great questions. Looks like we've made it to the end of our list, end of our time. So thank you everyone for the good discussion and questions. And hopefully we'll be seeing you soon at another webinar. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you.